Welcome, my friend. Come in and warm your hands by the fire. Tonight I'm reading from my journal here in Willow Cove. A quiet return to the cottage, a letter by the hearth, and a first morning by the sea. Settle your shoulders, slow your breath, and let the tide keep the clock for a while. If these stories bring you a little peace, would you press subscribe so you can find your way back? And if you'd like to leave tea money for the storyteller, there's a small bowl in the description. No need at all, only if it feels kind. Now, let's begin. Tonight, with the tide moving in its old soft way and the wind turning the cypress tops into a slow whisper, I unlocked the cottage by the sea and stepped back into the life that waited for me. I can say it plainly here, in my own hand. I have missed this place, missed it with a steady ache I carried like a small stone in my pocket. The stone became smooth over the years, but it never left. It's in my palm again, as I write. I'd driven most of the day along the coast road, windows cracked just enough for the smell of saltgrass and pine to drift through the cab of the truck. The light on that stretch of highway always falls in wide bands, bright, then dim, bright, then dim, as if the sky breathes in and out, and the world keeps time with it. When the dunes rose and the bellies of the clouds turned pewter before rain, I knew I was close. Willow Cove never announces itself. It reveals itself the way an old friend does, by easing into your vision and then standing quietly, until you remember to say hello. The lighthouse came first, its beam sweeping the water in slow, patient arcs. I hadn't seen that beam in years, yet it kept turning, faithfully, like a heartbeat that never forgot me. I lifted my hand from the wheel as if to wave, a small habit that makes me smile and shake my head, even now. The road narrowed and curved between the sleeping cottages, chimneys leaning into the wind like quiet listeners at a door. The tires hummed low against the damp gravel, and when I rolled over the little dip before my lane, I heard that familiar note that belongs only to this spot, tires on wet stone, a shallow crunch, a sound that rings somewhere between the ears and the heart. By the time I parked beneath the cypresses, the air had cooled, and the sea had found its voice again, louder now, steadier, filling the space that silence leaves behind when you stop moving. That deep, tidal hush rose and fell, then rose again. And for a while, I just sat there with the engine off, hands resting on the wheel, letting the sound wash through me, slowly filling in all the empty corners of the day. The cottage waited at the end of the path, white paint weathered down to a soft gray, ivy climbing the chimney in a patient braid. The porch light gone, the iron hook still there, rocking gently on its screw. I stood at the door and set my palm against the wood. Cool, solid, familiar as the back of my own hand. "I'm home, old friend," I said, because houses are friends when they have carried your life inside theirs. The hinges gave their small complaint as I pushed the door inward, dust turning in a narrow shaft of evening light that slipped between the curtains. The smell met me first, as scent always does. Cedar, old paper, a trace of the sea. The hearth waited cold, a neat stack of logs beside it exactly where I'd left them, as if time had respected the arrangement. I struck a match. The flame wavered before the kindling caught, and soon the fire began to take its slow, deliberate breath. It moved twig to twig, then into the belly of a log, burrowing like a small fox until the whole hearth glowed gold. The light climbed the walls, settled into the corners, reclaiming the room from its long dusk. The clock above the mantel kept on with its calm ticking, proof that some things never feel the need to stop and start over. They simply continue. Outside, the first stars gathered over the darkening water. Inside, the house changed the way houses do when they understand they're lived in again. The air softened, the boards sighed. It felt relieved somehow to be home again, too. I set my bag by the door and walked through the rooms with my hands half raised. Not to move anything, only to greet it. The kitchen counter still wore the shallow scratches of long mornings long ago. The brass teapot rested by the stove with the quiet posture of something ready to be needed. By the window, the chair was there. Her chair, Miriam's. I let my fingers trace one arm and felt the old smoothness, oiled by hands and sunlight. The chair didn't break my heart, it warmed it, which is a different kind of ache. Every corner said a soft hello. Every floorboard spoke in its own small creak and sigh. I had the strange feeling that I wasn't stepping into the past, but into a present that had been faithfully held for me. And I think that's what coming home truly is, when the place itself has been waiting patiently. And so here I am, at this small desk by the window, with the sea below and the fire behind, writing these lines by lamplight to mark the return. The ink dries slower in the damp, which is fine. I have no hurry left in me tonight. There is a music to an old house at night. It comes back to you faster than you expect, as if your body kept the score even when you forgot the melody. The walls breathe with the wind. The rafters settle when the rain begins, and the floors murmur in greetings you can name by room. Even the kettle finds its way toward a sigh that matches the tempo of the tide. I filled the lamp and turned its small key until the chimney wore a warm halo. The rain arrived in fine, steady lines that ticked softly against the glass, and I set a pan of water on the stove, reaching for the tea tin that has outlasted newer things. The paper label is almost ghosted now, but the hinges still close with that tidy tin click that says, "I belong here." When the kettle's whisper deepened into a low exhale, I poured the water into a blue porcelain cup with white blossoms around the rim. I let the leaves float and fall, added a little milk, and waited for steam to curl up like breath. The first sip was ordinary and perfect. I have no other way to put it. The ordinary done with care is a kind of perfection. I ran my finger along the book spines beneath the lamplight, their blues having weathered toward brown, as if they too have spent long summers by the sea. Some lean against each other now, the way old friends do. Saying the titles aloud felt like greeting neighbors on the road, each name returning a small packet of memory. Who gave it? When it was read, which season it carried me through. I lifted one, and a faint dust rose, then settled again, a breath I almost apologized for disturbing. On the windowsill, Miriam's cracked teacup sat exactly where it should, the hairline crack threading along the porcelain like a drawn coastline. Beside it, a folded napkin she embroidered with a single letter, A. Her needlework was always simple, clean, deliberate. How many times did those hands pour tea for me here, while the late light braided itself through the ivy? More than I can count. Perhaps that is why objects grow gentle with age. They absorb the repetition of tenderness and quietly give it back. I opened the window just enough to welcome the sea more clearly. It came in cool and salt wet, and mingled with the bergamot and the faint smoke of the first fire. Home has a smell you cannot counterfeit. You know it as your own the moment it touches your lungs. I walked and I listened. The bedroom still holds lavender in its fibers, a whisper of oil rubbed into the bedposts years ago. The attic steps groan on the third and the seventh, like a song missing 2 notes short of a scale. In the hallway hangs the photograph from the summer we painted the house. Miriam laughing, our boy with a dripping brush, and me trying very hard to look stern, while my eyes give me away. I touched the frame and said softly, "We made a good life here." The house accepted the sentence as true. I could feel it in the boards, in the air between the words. To write a house is to write your own body, the ways it loosens, the ways it holds. Time stood in the middle of these rooms like an old companion who is less frightening than he used to be. He seemed to wait, courteous and unhurried, as if to say, "Tell it your way, I will not interrupt." I set the cup down, listened for the soft click on the saucer, and let the quiet gather again around the lamp's low circle of light. Even the smallest sounds remembered their places, the clock's patient syllables, the rain thinning to a hush, the fire shifting its weight in the grate, and somewhere beneath it all, the steady breath of the sea. It is a kind of choir, this house at night, every voice gentle, every voice necessary. I took up the pen and felt that old, familiar steadiness return, the one that comes when the home you keep is also keeping you. When the kettle cooled and the rain eased from a steady line to a faint ticking, I settled into the chair that faces both the hearth and the sea, the sort of chair that finds the honest balance for you, warming your front while the night air cools your hands. I reached for a book, and when I opened it, a folded paper slipped free and landed on the rug with a sound so soft it felt like a secret arriving. I knew the fold before I knew the ink. Miriam folded letters the way she wrapped gifts, neat corners, a little space left inside, as if each one kept a breath waiting. My name was written across the front in her careful hand. The paper carried the faintest trace of lavender. I held it for a while before I read it, my thumb resting on the loop of the R, the way it has rested 1,000 times on envelopes, lists, and notes left on a breadboard in those generous years. To feel time in paper is to know that love can be stored in the thinnest things. The letter bore a date more than 10 years gone. The ink had faded a shade, but not failed. Her lines were as clear to me now as the day they were written.
If you're reading this, Arthur, it means you've come home. The hydrangeas by the window are blooming again. I've kept the firewood dry and the kettle polished. I hope the sea still sings to you when the nights grow long. Remember, love doesn't leave. It lingers quietly, waiting for us to notice.
I smiled at the last line. Miriam always took the simplest path to the truest place. She might have made a fine cartographer if life had sent her that way. She could map a heart in 4 sentences, leave you room to arrive, and greet you at the door as if you had done the traveling yourself. I leaned back and let the letter rest on my lap. The fire accepted another small log and changed its music accordingly. Lower, rounder, a soft knit of ember and flame. The rain gave the glass a few final taps and wandered off down the coast. The clock spoke its patient syllables into the room, tick by kindly tick. Companionship disguised as timekeeping. I did not feel sorrow. I felt gratitude shaped like warmth in the bones. There is a difference, and the difference matters. "Thank you," I said into the room. No flourish, no ceremony. And the word didn't echo, it settled. Some words do that when they are meant. I folded the letter along its old creases, felt the paper's memory guiding my fingers, and tucked it beneath the lamp as if placing a small light inside another. Love relocates when its ordinary forms change. It moves to letters in books, to teacups on sills, to the steady tick that reminds you to breathe, to the way a chair can hold two histories at once, hers and mine, and not break under the weight. For a while I watched the flame draw gold up the bricks and listened to the sea answer from below the window. Two steady heartbeats, one of fire, one of water, keeping time for the house. I thought how strange and saving it is that we can be carried by what we once carried. How a letter written in another season can take your weight tonight and hold you steady until the dark grows kind again. I set the book aside, smoothed the rug where the letter had landed, and let the quiet close around the chair the way a shawl does around an old friend's shoulders. I will keep the letter near the lamp, close enough to catch a little warmth, far enough to rest. Tomorrow I'll place it where my hand can find it in the first pale light, between the clock and the cup in that small country where morning begins. For now the fire is low, the room is easy, and Miriam's words are with me, unhurried, undemanding, lingering quietly, waiting, as she said, for me to notice. When the rain finally unstitched itself from the sky, I took the lantern from its hook and stepped out onto the porch. The air washed and set out to dry, every leaf looking newly made. The moon lifted and laid a silver path across the water, the way a careful hand lays a ribbon, and I followed the steps down to the sand, letting it take the mark of me. Each print darkened, then slowly filled, as if the shore were thirsty, and I had brought it a small drink. Down at the waterline, the world simplified itself to honest sounds, the hush and return of the waves, the faint call of a gull working the late shift beyond the point, the small creak of the lantern handle in my hand. I bent for a shell rounded to satin by years of tumbling, white as bone, smooth as a shoulder, and turned it over, thinking, she would have liked this one. There was no sting in the thought, only a quiet nod. I walked with the tide tugging gently at my boots and the sky widening step by step. The sea is a generous translator. It takes everything I cannot say and renders it into a language I can live with. I let it do that work again tonight. There is something sacred about returning to a place that once knew you. The cottage does not ask for reasons. The cove does not inquire where you've been. The shore isn't in the business of interrogations. It receives you the way the tide receives the river's offering, again and again without judgment. When the lantern needed a little coaxing and the chill worked kindly into my sleeves, I turned toward home. The cottage glowed on the hill as if its walls remembered how to be a beacon. Through the window I could see the fire folding itself into a bed of coals and my chair, keeping its shape by the hearth. I climbed the steps and hung the lantern back on its hook. The porch boards moved beneath me with the slow rhythm of the waves below, and I sat in the rocker to match them. Far off, the bell buoy spoke its one sound, measured, unhurried, floating the way a steady word floats through a long conversation. A thread of fog unrolled along the point, and the lighthouse answered with its calm pulse, there and there again, enough to say, we are seen. Down the coast, nets rustled somewhere, and a mast gave a soft, hollow knock against a pier, human work winding itself to a close. A stray cat padded along the rail and paused by my boot, salt in its whiskers, moonlight in its eyes. I gave it the back of my knuckles, and it accepted in the way cats do, brief and dignified, then settled at the step as if it had been invited. We listened together. The sea breathed. The rocker kept a small covenant with the porch. A thin ribbon of phosphorescence stitched itself into the nearest wave, brightening and fading as if the tide were thinking. I thought of the tasks the morning would welcome. Hinges to oil, a latch to plane, a cloth left where dust first gathers. None of it urgent, all of it necessary. Small fidelity paid in the currency of attention. The cottage seems to prefer this kind of care. The steady hand, the willing ear. Perhaps I do too. From the hill, I could make out the lighthouse gallery. Maybe Clara walking the circle with her logbook, checking weather, marking wind, doing the honest arithmetic of the night. I imagined setting a jar of apricot jam by her door at first light, a small sweetness to say what words sometimes can't. Names travel well in night air. Clara, Mr. Barlow, Thomas. And when I said them softly, the house seemed to lean forward, as if walls can recognize the people who keep them company. A breeze found the eaves and worked them into a low, contented timber. The lantern glass cooled against the hook. The rocker drew a quiet figure 8 into the boards. I rested my hands on the rails and let the tide steady my breathing. Rise and fall, and rise again. Some places keep watch for us, so we can set our watch down for a while, and remember how to be unhurried. I stood at last and touched the door frame out of habit, an old blessing given in passing, then stepped inside to the mild glow of embers and the easy hush a house earns after weather. I left the lantern by the hook, laid the cloth on the rail, and set the journal where morning will find it, between the cup and the clock, and left a place on the page for whatever the tide brings next. The morning arrived the way good mornings do, quietly, with a pale band of light finding its way between the curtains and the gulls holding their voices as if not to wake the sea. I rose before the sun cleared the dune, set the kettle on a low flame, and stepped out to the porch with the broom under my arm. The boards were cool, and the air carried that tender salt the night leaves behind. I began at the far corner, small strokes first, letting the sand whisper through the cracks, each pass a little lullaby for the wood. I've missed this simple work, the way a clean line appears where the broom has been, the way the hand learns the grain again. Inside, the kettle made its soft argument toward a boil. I washed the blue cup, set it on the sill to catch the early light, and opened the window a hand's width. The sea answered from below, low and even, as if it meant to pace the day for me. I took my first sip and tasted the house, bergamot and cedar, a little smoke from last night's fire. You cannot rush a morning like this. It will only grow more beautiful if you wait. I laid out the tools for small repairs. Cloth, oil, a slender file, the plane I favor for stubborn latches. The front hinge sang a bit too brightly, so I spoke back with a drop of oil, working the pin until the sound mellowed into courtesy. The bedroom latch needed only the lightest shave. The brass grew agreeable as the wood remembered its width. This is what I meant last night, fidelity in small currencies. A house listens when you handle it kindly. Perhaps we all do.
Start with the doorways.
She would remind me, tying her hair with a ribbon.
If the thresholds are easy, the rooms will forgive the rest.
I smiled without intending to and ran the cloth once more along the jamb, leaving a faint, clean scent behind. The morning widened. The clock approved each minute in its patient way. I wrapped a jar of apricot jam in a towel for padding and slipped it into the basket, Clara's name on a small tag, written earlier with a steady hand. A length of good twine for Mr. Barlow went in next, and a small paper envelope of sea glass fragments that had gathered at the porch corner, soft greens and milk-white ovals, for Thomas, should I find him by the dock. The sun lifted then, not dramatically, just enough to turn the dune grass to threads of brass. It was time to walk. The path to the lighthouse follows the curl of the cove, a modest, honest footway that knows the steps it carries. I kept to the shadowed side while the light learned the faces of the cottages. Someone had left bread out to cool, covered by a cloth, and somewhere a dog barked once, then thought better of it. The lighthouse gained height as I drew near, its gallery winking with the last of the lantern glow. Clara was there, of course she was, pencil tucked behind her ear, hair bound back against the breeze. She saw the basket first, then me. "Arthur," she said, and her voice did that kind thing it does, like trimming a storm to size. We didn't make ceremony of it. She took the jar with a small nod, the sort of gratitude that lives in shared work rather than words. We stood with our elbows on the rail for a minute while the sea made its long case for being itself. I asked after wind and tide. She asked after hinges and sleep. "Both are holding," I said, and that was enough. She promised to return the jar with a wedge of fresh bread when noon allowed it. Promises in this town always come attached to bread. From the lighthouse I made my way down to the dock house, where Mr. Barlow keeps his stool and his order. He was planing a board to the narrow patience only a keel will accept. Shavings drifted against his boots like curls of butter. I set the twine on the bench and he glanced at it once, then at me, then returned to the blade. "Try," he said without looking up, sliding the plane toward my hand. I took the pass he offered and let the steel do its quiet work. It came away with a clean ribbon that folded back on itself in a neat, surprised loop. "Good," he said, which from Mr. Barlow is a letter of recommendation. We spoke of the northerly coming on Thursday, and of a small leak in the Hartley skiff, the kind that asks for listening more than for pitch. There are friendships that prefer the grammar of doing. This is one. Thomas found me on the pier as boys do. First the clatter of feet, then the overflow of news. He's taller, as expected, with that new spare grace that adolescence gives to limbs before it remembers shoulders. He carried a pocketful of summer, as he always has. We arranged our sea glass on the rail, mine small and ordinary, his astonishing, as if the tide had decided to mentor him personally. "For your mantle," he said, out of habit, then flushed a little and added, "if you still keep one." I told him the mantle was exactly where it should be, and that the house had saved a space for the blues. He beamed at that. Boys understand saved spaces in a way grown men sometimes forget. By the bakery, Mrs. Green had her lemons in a bright pyramid and a shelf of round loaves cooling like small suns. I put coins in the little bowl and she pretended not to see, which is our ritual. "You'll need two," she said, already wrapping a second loaf. "One to share and one to be honest about. Bread, like good stories, divides neatly and multiplies anyway." I promised to return the towel, and she said she'd consider forgiving me when I did. Some kindnesses remain delightfully conditional. On the walk home, the cove was busy in the gentlest sense. Boats answering their slips, doors opening to air out rooms. A laugh carried farther than it had any right to travel. The house grew visible above the dune. Nothing grand, only right size to the life it holds. I felt that small, leaning forward sensation again. The one that says a place can be glad to see you. Inside, the lamp glass was still clear from last night's cloth, and the list lay on the table with 3 items crossed. Enough for a morning. I sliced one of Mrs. Green's loaves and set 2 pieces on a plate with jam, one for the chair by the window, Miriam's chair, and one for mine. It isn't superstition, it's memory with manners. I ate slowly, watching the sea make and unmake its small promises along the shore. Then I reached for the journal and turned to a fresh page, the paper cool to the touch, ready, as all good mornings are, to be written into. Some days begin by asking everything of you. This wasn't one of them. This day wanted only attention, paid in brooms and hinges, in bread and names, in the right-sized work that lets a man's heart remember its dimensions. I set the pen down, not because I was finished, but because the light had reached the sill and the kettle had begun again to think about singing. There is wisdom in stopping at the moment when the next step is simply to live it. Noon announced itself without hurry, the kind of light that doesn't insist so much as arrive. I wrapped the towel around the warm loaf Mrs. Green insisted I be honest about, set the apricot jars ribbon straight, and took the path that skirts the cove. The day had done good work on the water, coin bright in places, slate in others, while the wind kept its word and stayed courteous. I passed 2 open doors on Bay Street. Both smelled of soap and lemon. Doorways tell you how a town feels about itself. Today, Willow Cove felt scrubbed and ready. Clara met me at the lighthouse gallery with the ease of someone who understands both the weather and her neighbors. She'd already traded the night ledger for the day book, pencil tucked behind her ear, sleeves rolled as if a breeze were a task worth meeting halfway. I set the jam on the rail. She set down a round of bread, still breathing out its heat. No speeches, just that small ceremonial exchange we practice when gratitude prefers to be eaten. Wind will freshen after 3, she said, glancing at the pennant. Good for kites, poor for hats. I promised to hold both accordingly. We leaned there another minute, sharing silence the way you share a bench, without needing to own more of it than your half. From the lighthouse, I took the long curve to the dockhouse. Mr. Barlow had his plane set fine and was working a stubborn edge to something more agreeable. He lifted his chin toward the stool beside him. Invitation, Barlow style, and I sat. We traded the small talk of people who prefer action to adjectives, weather, wood, and the Hartley's leak, which had moved from argument to conversation under his hand. I offered the twine. He weighed it with his eyes, not his palm, then set it by the mallet. "It'll do," he said, which in that shop is the sort of praise you hang a picture on. We let the shavings collect around our boots like the start of a tidy snow, then swept them into a barrel where they'd live a second life as kindling. There are crafts that teach you to waste nothing, not wood, not words. Thomas intercepted me outside, exactly where boys appear when errands feel finished and adventures might begin. He had found a piece of sea glass so clear it could have been the ghost of a wave. We turned it in the light, each finding our own small river inside it. "I think the tide is practicing for summer," he said, and I told him practice was how most good things first arrive. I gave him the little packet of softened blues I'd collected at the porch edge. He tried to play indifference, then failed at it in the most honest way. There are some gifts you accept to keep faith with the finder. On my way through town, I stopped at Mickle's shop to trade a word about a sticky window in the back bedroom. He tapped the jamb with 2 fingers, asked if the grain ran proud or shy, and sent me home with a sliver of wax and a story about a summer so humid you could wring soup from the air. I promised to try the wax first, the plain second, and to swear only as much as the problem required. Mickle approved the order. Willow Cove respects a sequence. By mid-afternoon, clouds herded themselves into small, polite companies above the point. I carried the bread and jam home the long way, along the path where the dune grass bows without surrendering. The house stood the way a friend stands when they see you coming, upright, glad, not making ceremony of it. I set the bread beneath a light towel to rest and checked the list on the table with a carpenter's pencil. 2 more lines crossed, a third softened by intent. Enough, and then a little more.
Errands first, then doorways.
She used to say, knotting her scarf before town.
So you go out carrying something and come home able to enter.
I heard the sentence the way the hinge hears oil, and I stepped through each threshold more easily for it. The porch, the kitchen, the small room where the clock keeps its covenant. Some advice arrives already fitted to the day. Toward evening, I walked the bread up to Clara's door, our exchange completed with a wedge cut clean and wrapped in paper. She tucked a note under the string, wind veering west at dusk, visibility improving after sundown, forecasts and kindness bound with the same twine. I took the lane past the little house with the blue gate. Someone had left a bowl of water on the stoop for the cat who recognizes me now. Salt still in its whiskers, moonlight stored in its eyes even before dark. We have an understanding, that cat and I. We keep watch from different posts and meet only at shift change. Back at the cottage, the window wax did its humble magic. The sash settled into its track without complaint, and I thanked it out loud, the way you thank a road that takes you home in one piece. I sliced the bread, shared the first piece with the chair by the window, Miriam's chair, and set the rest on the board with a knife that knows this job by heart. The sea tuned itself down for evening. The lamp made a calm country of the desk. Somewhere in that circle of light, the pencil found the page as naturally as a tide finds the shore. A day can be measured in errands and doorways, in what you carry out and what you can enter when you return. Today asked nothing dramatic, only that I be honest about the small things that keep a life from squeaking. I left the list with one line uncrossed on purpose, room for tomorrow to recognize itself. Outside, the lighthouse turned its patient arc. Inside, the house made its quiet music. And I, practiced by the hours, felt myself aligned to both. Evening gathered the way silk gathers at a wrist, the light thinning to that particular blue that makes edges kind and distances near. I took the porch chair and let the boards cool under my boots, while the sea lowered its voice to a steady hum. The first lamp inside made a small country of the desk. Out here, the sky made a larger one of the cove. Between them, a man could sit and be held by both. Thomas arrived the way evening does, without knocking. A quick step on the path, a half second of hesitation at the rail, and then his height arranging itself into boy again. He had something cupped in both hands, careful as a flame. "Storm glass," he said, and lifted it. An old sailor's bell jar with clear liquid and white feathers of crystal sleeping along the bottom. Mikkel says it reads the weather, or reads the reader who's watching it. I turned it so the last light could enter. Minute needles loosened, drifting like snow, deciding to be water again. It likes twilight best, Thomas added, proud of a fact learned that very afternoon. We set the storm glass on the porch table and watched it think. Inside the cottage, the clock gave a kindly punctuation to the blue hour. Down on the water, a rowing boat clicked in its oarlocks, patient, unembarrassed work. I told him about the bellbuoy's single note and how a steady tone can keep a whole shoreline honest. He told me about a gull with a torn wing that still landed exactly where it meant to. Practice, he said, making perfect look quiet. We let the talk fold itself between us like a spare blanket, used when needed, otherwise resting. The light deepened. Crystals climbed the glass in delicate ladders, first a lace at the base, then fine branches as if winter were writing its signature in miniature. Cold front, Thomas guessed, pleased to be the sort of person who can say such a thing on a porch and be believed. I nodded. Half for the weather, half for the boy becoming the man who will name it. Some evenings are less about forecast than about permission. Permission to grow, to guess, to be gently wrong on the way to being right. I fetched 2 slices of Mrs. Green's bread and a spoonful of apricot, one for him, one for me, and we ate the way good neighbors do, with more attention than ceremony. The cat made its inspection, awarded us a brief acknowledgement, and posted itself at the step facing the tide. "You and that cat," Thomas said, grinning. "Shift change," I told him. He understood at once. He had a question kept in his pocket, I could tell. The weight of it made him stand and sit twice before it found its shape. "Do things stop hurting here?" he asked, eyes on the storm glass, "or do they just sound different?" I took the longer path to the answer. "The cove tunes you," I said at last, "like a guitar on a nail, same strings, truer pitch." The storm glass agreed in silence, its lattice settling into a calm, the color of thought. Thomas tried the words on, then nodded as if they fit. When he left, he carried the storm glass carefully against his chest, the way one carries a lantern on a windward deck. At the gate, he turned back. "I'll bring it by after the weather," he said, which struck me as exactly the right promise for a boy to make to a porch in early evening. I watched him go until the path took him and the blue took the path. Inside, the lamp widened its circle. Outside, the first star declared itself with the modesty stars prefer. I wrote a line in the journal I knew I would likely cross out tomorrow, not because it was wrong, but because it will have already fulfilled its work tonight. Some hours are meant to be stood inside, not understood. The sea approved with a hush that felt like agreement.
"Leave the window a finger's width,"
she used to tell me when the sky went this blue.
"Let the evening come in on its own feet."
I did as she asked. The room took a deeper breath, the curtain lifted and settled, and the cottage found that fragile balance between lamp and star. Somewhere just beyond the sill, a moth practiced its small orbit, and the lighthouse began its patient accounting of the dark. I set the pen beside the journal, not so much finished as ready to listen. The storm glass would speak in its own handwriting by morning. The cat would make its rounds. The bell would say what bells say to those who trust them. For now, the blue hour had done its work. Edges kind, distances near. And the house, tuned by simple things, held the note. After the blue hour folded itself away, the evening settled into its steadier register, the kind that makes lamps seem wiser and floorboards more sure of their lines. I trimmed the wick, set the shade so the glow stayed low and kind, and listened as the wind shifted its shoulder from south to west, just as Clara promised. The storm glass on the sill had earned its say. The crystals loosened and rejoined like thoughts finding simpler words. The house spoke softly in its usual places, the hinge that now answered with courtesy, the bedroom latch sliding true, the window sash lowering without protest after Mickle's sliver of wax. You can hear the difference a day makes when you've paid your debts to the small things. I poured a modest cup of tea and let it breathe on the desk, while I wrote a line about the cove's patience and crossed out two others that tried too hard. The sea has a way of editing a man without taking the pen from his hand. Outside, the lighthouse swept its calm arithmetic across the water, there and there, enough to keep a harbor honest. The bell buoy answered in its single syllable, unembarrassed by repetition. Down on Bay Street, a door closed with the gentle finality of a chore finished well, and somewhere beyond the point, a dog gave one opinion and then reconsidered. Night collects such small reports and files them where they belong. I stood at the open window and let the weather right itself on my face. Cooler now, with that clean edge you can taste behind your teeth. The tide stepped down its stones and made room for darkness to do its quiet work. I thought of Clara walking the gallery, pencil behind her ear, and of Mr. Barlow banking his stove, of Thomas setting the storm glass on a shelf where morning light would have the first word. A town rests best when its keepers understand their posts. On the porch rail, the cat had resumed its office, tail wrapped, eyes half closed, the absolute picture of a watch kept without complaint. I placed a small saucer of water near the step, and the gesture felt less like charity and more like recognizing a colleague. We share the shift. The cat takes the rail, the bell takes the point, and I take the window. Between us, the cove sleeps undisturbed. I turned back to the room and straightened what the day had set, slightly askew. The pen at a kinder angle to the page, the folded towel placed where a hand will remember it, the chair by the window drawn just enough to catch first light. These are not perfections. They are invitations. A house responds to them in the night. Boards loosening, fabrics relaxing, air settling into its proper corners. By morning, you can feel that it has taken you up on the offer.
Leave a little space in everything.
She once told me, smoothing the cloth on the table.
Room for breath, room for mercy, room for what arrives late.
I stepped back from the desk and saw it plainly, the inch of empty page after the last line, the unclaimed hook on the rail, the window open a finger's width, not absence, readiness, the kind that makes a night generous. When the lamp began to dim of its own accord, I obliged it. The lighthouse could have the larger room, the embers could keep the smaller one. I stood once more at the window, matched my breath to the tide rise and fall, and rise again, and let the dark complete the sentence I had been writing all day. The house found its nighttime measure, boards easy, embers content, the window open a finger's width, so the sea could keep its slow counsel. I rinsed the cup, set it upside down on the towel, and straightened the pen beside the journal. Small rites a man performs so the day understands he's grateful. The lighthouse made its patient circuit over the water, there and there again. And the bell buoy, faithful as ever, kept time for those who sleep. I wrote only a single line, no more than the truth would bear, and left the rest of the page unharmed. Leave room for what arrives late, I reminded myself, and closed the cover with the care you give a friend's hand at the door. The cat on the rail adjusted its tail, approved the arrangement, and returned to its watch without comment. We are colleagues, after all. I walked the rooms once, doorways smooth under the palm, latch agreeable, sash comfortable in its track. It is a fine comfort when a house answers you without being asked. In the bedroom, the air held a little lavender from years ago, kindness stored in wood and fabric, and beyond the curtain the tide worked its quiet arithmetic on the stones. I matched my breath to it, rise and fall, and rise again, and felt the day loosen its knot.
Tomorrow has manners.
She once told me, folding a corner of the sheet.
It knocks softly, so leave the door on the latch.
I left it so, the latch easy, the window barely ajar, the journal waiting between the cup and the clock. Everything arranged not as an ending, but as an invitation. I lowered the lamp and let the room accept the dark the way a harbor accepts the tide, without argument, with gratitude. Somewhere out beyond the point, a boat turned in its sleep. Somewhere on the gallery, Clara made one last note. Somewhere along Bay Street, bread cooled for morning hands. The cove keeps its promises whether I'm awake to witness them or not. I set the journal where morning will find it, between the cup and the clock, and left a place on the page for whatever the tide brings next. That will do for tonight. The cottage is easy, the tide is patient, and you are among friends. If the story kept you company, press subscribe so the next one finds you, and, only if it feels right, leave a bit of tea money in the bowl below. It helps keep the lamp burning. Rest now. I'll keep watch with the sea a little longer. When morning comes, we'll meet here again, between the cup and the clock.